And this tour was also post-World War II. What did the Queen represent post-World War II?
Well, I think she would have liked to be seen to represent change and a new era. Bear in mind, she was only 27 when she set off on that tour. You know, Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister. He welcomed her back to Britain at the end of that tour. But I think Britain and the rest of the world, the Commonwealth, was very anxious then to shrug off, if you like, the awfulness, the depression, the grimness of those war years. And this young queen represented a change. I mean, in Britain, politically, things hadn't changed a lot. You know, we still had very much the same sort of political structure, the same feel about our politicians. But the Queen was very much a breath of fresh air. And I think that tour really set the tone for that. And I think this was her saying to the world, I've arrived, I'm going to be different, I'm more accessible. I mean, her accessibility then, back in the 50s, was nothing as compared to the accessibility that the royal family has striven for since. But nevertheless, it heralded a new era, a new approach by the royals, a new way of being seen, interacting with the public.
Let's talk about Charles's history in Australia. Why did the King, or back then he was of course a prince, choose to study here in Australia at the age of 17?
Well, Charles had been at a school in Scotland called Gordonston, which was known for its, I suppose to put it mildly, fairly harsh routine. And he is said to have referred to that school as Colditz in kilt, comparing it to a famous German prisoner of war camp. There's been a lot of debate about that since. Did he really say that? Was it really as bad as he thought it was? But there is no doubt he had a wretched time at that boarding school in Scotland. He was bullied, he wasn't happy, and it was a very, very tough existence. Not dissimilar in many ways to the school that he then went to in Australia, Timbertops. But I think the idea was, A, to broaden his horizons, and B, to get him into a place where he actually would enjoy himself more. And I don't think there's any question that that was the case. I mean, he spent 6 months out there in Australia. He called it the happiest part, or the best part, of his entire education. And I think when he looks back on that, as he has done on several occasions, he would see that visit to Australia as being very, very formative for him. He found himself out there. He was away from the sort of stuffiness of Britain, the whole expectation of the royal family, even then the public attention on them. It was much more private. And it was much more relaxed. I mean, there were moments there he has written about in letters where he did find it pretty tough. But overall, it was a good experience for him.
It wasn't an easy trip. He undertook a lot of different expeditions in the blistering heat. He had to climb peaks, spend freezing nights in a sleeping bag, for example. He really got a taste of Australia, didn't he?
Yes, he did, and he complained about, we couldn't cook our tinned food because of the risk of bushfires, and, you know, we had to eat cold food. He said his hands got covered in blisters. You know, he was complaining then, and he's not averse to complaining about things now. But I think overall, despite those moments when he was tested physically, I think he felt it was a very, very worthwhile experience. And I think it would be fair to say that was the beginning of his lifelong fondness for Australia, which, of course, lasts to this day.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about Charles and Diana's visit, 1983. This was their first overseas tour together. How were they received down under?
Well, Australia went bonkers for Diana, didn't it? I mean, people were talking then about this was the new Beatlemania. If you remember when the Beatles first started, people were screaming and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. They went nuts for Diana. Now, did that cause a problem? And the answer is yes, it almost certainly did. That tour has been depicted most recently in The Crown as being kind of the beginning of the falling apart of Charles and Diana, because Charles was enraged, as it was portrayed in the TV show. He was enraged by the popularity that she attracted to his exclusion, and part of the script is that he shouts, "This is supposed to be my tour." I think people who were on that tour would agree that there is certainly a grain, if not more than a grain, of truth in that. One of the big problems with Charles and Diana from the get-go was her incredible popularity, and to the point that I suppose he almost felt ignored when they were in public, because all eyes were on her. He also is said to have complained about her lack of enthusiasm when they were climbing Uluru, Ayers Rock, I think, as it was then. You know, it was very hot and she couldn't make it, and, you know, she had to go back, and he complained, and one thing and another. But it was as a lot of royal tours of Australia have been, it was in its way a watershed moment. Their first tour, and it very quickly started to go wrong. And a lot of people will say that it was on that tour that the root of the problem began, as in fact it was to many years later for Harry and Meghan.
We'll want to get to that, to Harry and Meghan shortly, but, you know, looking at some of the vision of Charles and Diana, they did have some beautiful moments here in Australia. There's vision of them dancing together, for example, lovely vision of them dancing together. They certainly gave the impression, Tim, that all was okay.
Yeah, I mean, as they had to, but when they got home, you know, they went their separate ways. Yes, as I say, it's probably easy now, with the benefit of hindsight, to exaggerate rifts that happened, because we know what happened subsequently with Charles and Diana, and yes, they danced together, they shared moments of affection, but there is no doubt that tour and the attention that Diana got caused a lot of friction, and, well, if that was the case, things just continue to go downhill from there.
Not all royals seem to love Australia. Harry and Meghan said that their 2018 visit changed everything. Did Australia break them?
No, I don't think Australia broke them. I think they loved Australia, and I think Australia responded to them. Bear in mind, in those very early days of Meghan and Harry, Meghan got an incredible reception from the public, both at home and abroad. She was literally, I mean, if Diana had been a breath of fresh air, you can multiply that by 2 for Meghan, for all sorts of reasons. She was seen as a very, very exciting future royal. Well, she was a current royal, but, you know, representing the future of the royal family. The problem with Harry and Meghan's tour of Australia, as far as they were concerned, was that it was a massive success. In Meghan's terms, it was a smash hit. People loved them. Wherever they went, they loved Australia. The trouble was, it didn't get any recognition. When they got back, you know, there were no trumpets, there was no fanfare. They just came back, and as far as palace officials were concerned, hey, it's another royal tour. You did fine. You did a good job. It's what expected of you. And listen, next week you're going to open up a library somewhere in the Midlands of Britain, and it is going to be a bit rainy and wet, and it won't take long, but there you go. So, you know, it gave Meghan a taste of the more glamorous and exciting side of royal life. And I think she and Harry had expected that they would get much more praise and recognition from that tour. And in fact, according to them, all they got was resentment. Meghan wasn't praised for being so popular. The palace machine began actually to resent her. So in the same way that it was a watershed, if you like, for Charles and Diana, so it was for Harry and Meghan.
Many royals have done since the Queen visited back in 1954. How reassuring are they for Australians that the monarchy is there for them and that they care?
Well, you know, the royal family is acutely aware that in many parts of the Commonwealth, not least Australia, you know, things may change. There's been one referendum, there may very well be another. Who knows, you know, which way it would go. But Australia is very important to the royals because it's close to their hearts. It's a place they like. They enjoy being there. They always have a great visit there. The public responds to them very well. I was with the Queen there in 2011, which was her last visit to Australia, and really it was kind of her last big overseas tour. And the one thing that surprised me, amazed me there, as it did almost every time, you know, I travelled anywhere with the Queen, was the incredible public response. I mean, you get it. 1954, she's a new queen. The war's just over. You know, there were no thoughts of getting rid of the monarchy, and everybody waved flags and, you know, shouted hurrah. But society has changed. A lot of things have changed. You know, we're not as deferential as we used to be. But somehow, this woman, and I think she was then 85 years old, just drew the most incredible crowds. I mean, quite extraordinary. And I remember her going down the river in Brisbane on that tour, and the banks of the river being lined with people. When she got off the boat, the place was packed. And you know, that's the pulling power of the royal family. It's whether you like them or not. It's extraordinary, and certainly in all the time that I worked on them, it never ceased to amaze me.